So today, we're digging into the story of a man who helps unlock the very code of life. I mean, a true scientific titan whose name is literally etched in stone. But, and it's a big but, it's also the story of a man who became a total outcast, shunned by the very world that he helped create. This is the incredibly complex and kind of messy legacy of James Watson.
I mean, look at this. His name is right there, carved into New York City's Nobel Monument. J.D. Watson, Medicine, 1962. It's about as permanent a testament as you can get, celebrating a discovery that absolutely kicked off the modern era of biology. But like I said, that's really only one side of the story.
And that brings us to the central puzzle of this whole thing. How does someone who co-discovered the secret of life itself, we're talking about the double helix structure of DNA, how does that person end up complaining that he's been made an unperson? How did a hero of science become a total pariah?
Okay, so to really get our heads around that, we've got to go back to the beginning. Back to his incredible rise as, well, a codebreaker of the natural world. Right from the start, it was clear James Watson was different. He was a quiz kid on the radio, showing off how smart he was to the whole country. And get this, he enrolled at the University of Chicago when he was just 15. At first, he was all about birds, a real ornithology enthusiast. But then he read this super influential book, Erwin Schrödinger's What is Life? And everything changed. His focus just completely pivoted from bird watching to cracking the fundamental secrets of genetics.
So, this new obsession with genetics? Well, it led him straight to Cambridge University and right into a collaboration that was going to change science forever. And the speed of what happened next is just astonishing. So 1951, Watson gets to Cambridge, he meets Francis Crick, and, this is a huge deal, he sees X-ray data from another researcher, Rosalind Franklin. Barely 2 years later, bam, they've solved the puzzle. By April of 53, their paper is published in Nature, and by 1962, they've got a Nobel Prize for it, which they shared with Maurice Wilkins. Okay, but here's where the story gets really complicated. Watson himself, in his own book, The Double Helix, basically admits that they got their hands on Rosalind Franklin's data without her knowing about it. I mean, this quote just lays it all out there. Having her unpublished work, especially her incredible X-ray images, was absolutely critical for their breakthrough. But, the proper credit? It was nowhere to be found at the time. So why was this such a world-changing discovery? Well, this double helix, this elegant twisted ladder shape, it finally showed how life's instruction book is written, and maybe even more importantly, how it's copied from one generation to the next. It was like finding the master key that unlocked the door to pretty much all of modern biology, genetics, and medicine. Now, you might think a Nobel Prize is the peak of a career, right? Well, for Watson, his influence only got bigger from there. He stopped being just a researcher and became a real empire builder in the world of science. So in 1968, he took over at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And over the next, nearly 40 years, he transformed it from this relatively small facility into a global powerhouse for research. I mean, they were doing groundbreaking work, especially on the genetic roots of cancer and brain disorders. His standing in the scientific world at this point was just undeniable. I mean, he was picked to be the very first head of the Human Genome Project. Think about that. This massive, monumental effort to map every single gene in the human body. It was one of the most ambitious science projects in history, and James Watson was the guy in charge. But yeah, there's always a but in this story. Alongside this amazing scientific career, a very different story started to take shape. It was a pattern of controversy, and it was fueled entirely by his own public statements. And this goes way back. It really kicked off in 1968 with his best-selling book, The Double Helix. Now, on one hand, it's a super exciting inside look at the discovery, but on the other, it got slammed for how he portrayed Rosalind Franklin. He called her Rosie, and critics said he painted her as this kind of difficult assistant who couldn't even understand her own work, which was just not true.
And his controversial comments weren't just about his old colleagues. Over the years, he made a whole bunch of remarks that were seen as, pretty offensive. Like this one from the year 2000, where he basically linked a person's weight to whether or not you'd hire them.
But the one comment that really, truly triggered his downfall came in 2007. He gave an interview where he said he was, quote, inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa. And he tied that to a completely baseless idea about genetic differences in intelligence between races. That comment, that just shattered any remaining tolerance from the scientific community. The backlash was immediate, and it was severe. His book tour in the UK, canceled. Cold Spring Harbor Lab, the place he had built for 40 years, suspended him. He was then forced to resign. And then, as if that weren't enough, he repeated these views in a documentary in 2019. And the lab just stripped him of all his remaining honorary titles. They completely cut ties. So, where does that leave us? What are we supposed to make of all this? How do you even begin to assess the legacy of a man who was, at the same time, a scientific giant and a source of these profoundly offensive ideas? His legacy is just this deep, deep contradiction. I mean, on one side of the ledger, you've got the Nobel laureate, the guy who co-discovered the structure of DNA, the leader of the Human Genome Project. And on the other side, you've got the provocateur, the guy who used data without permission, wrote dismissively about a brilliant female colleague, and made comments that were widely condemned as racist, sexist, and just plain pseudoscientific. And maybe nothing captures the sadness of his later years more than this moment. In 2014, he became the first living Nobel laureate to ever sell his medal at auction. He said he'd become an unperson and had no income. Now, the Russian billionaire who bought it actually gave it back to him later, but the act itself, it just speaks volumes about how far he had fallen. And so we're left with this profound and honestly pretty uncomfortable question. Can we separate the science from the scientist? Should we? Watson's story, it isn't just about genetics anymore. It's become a major case study that forces all of us to grapple with how we remember, how we celebrate, and how we condemn the complicated heroes and maybe anti-heroes of our history.